I think we are in a continuous mode. I think from Jeevan's presentation, I can continue on words. The thing is, Jeevan mentioned, and also Veena mentioned, the Global Compact, and Jeevan specifically talked about some of the things that the Kolkata Declaration last year did bring up, and I'm also sort of making that my reference point, where in the very beginning of this conference or this workshop, we knew that some of one of the core things was the Global Compact did not always bring in the local or the national in a very meaningful way, and it needed to be brought in further, as well as looking at structures of discrimination as one of the core parts of that. And from that statement, I think my presentation has to deal a lot with the national level of this situation, of how to address discrimination and other things at the national governmental level. And I will make an example of the making of the National Action Plan, which was basically launched the day before I came to Kolkata, on women, peace and security. And that stems, it's not part of the Global Compact, but many of its concept is. It is as you know, it stems from the UN Security Council Resolution 1325 that was launched in 2000. At the same time, and Bangladesh playing a very lead role in propagating it. And also, as a result of that, I'm also going to show you a little bit of a film which will talk about protection, maybe, and gender discrimination, protection, violence, from the very local level of the host community. And so, women, peace and security is of course a very, 1325 actually honed in on women in armed conflict. And then of course there were a series of other follow-up resolutions which broadened it into looking at extremism, prevention of extremism, and other things. But the kind of peace, the kind of security, just as a background, I talk about this as an insider because I was asked to be the lead consultant in drafting this National Action Plan. And basically it's a personal journey that I'm going to relate to you about the difficulties, the challenges, and how I saw the national being framed in terms of, in terms of the planning that took place. So peace, security, human security were perceived in broad forms. Peace being not merely the absence of war, but presence of harmony, justice, and that is structures of power at the community, national and international levels. Security was not only national security, but non-traditional or human security. And so it had characteristics like being people-centered, multi-sectoral, comprehensive, context-specific, prevention-oriented. How far that got related in the actual drafting of the plan can be questioned. But basically, one of the conceptual things we tried to bring in from the very beginning was women, what is women peace and security? It's not gender peace and security. So the central point of woman was important to conceptualize. So how was women conceptualized in the agenda for peace and security? So one was that women impacted differently in conflicts. So one had to address women's needs because they were different from that of men. Then prioritizing women's agenda vis-a-vis other agendas, encouraging multiple identities. So what kind of a woman? The woman may be African, the woman might be minor, the women might be in terms of a mother. So in that sense, the multiple identity concept was very much ingrained in the definition of women. Promoting networking and organizing, we all understand that, and a balanced representation, and legalizing and institutionalizing gender equality as a contextual premise, and also incorporating women's perception of conflict and solutions to conflict. So all these were definitely somewhere or the other, in all these until the resolution 2242 were extensions or going into depth of certain aspects of what 1325. The four pillars that is usually perceived in most national plans, action plans of 1325 is participation of women, more participation, prevention of conflict through incorporating women's perspectives into early warning systems, violent extremism, public education. So prevention, as we conceived, was basically a root of the conflict, and hence was the ultimate form of protection. If you prevent a conflict, there will not be any conflict. So this was the idea. Protection of women, of course, became one of the several pillars, but both, and it stemmed from both during and after the conflict. And relief and recovery, or also peace building, as some national action plan says it, engages women and addresses their needs in relief and recovery. What was the Bangladesh context for us? Bangladesh, where was peace and security issues in Bangladesh? So we already had a war of independence. So women and war were existing issues in the whole context. Justice for war crimes was a movement and a mobilization process that was going on, positively, negatively, but it is a process in Bangladesh. Women in UN peacekeeping missions is again a very live issue in current Bangladesh. And the role of women in preventing violent extremism is also, because violent extremism also exists in Bangladesh. And women are not only victims, but also stakeholders as well as soldiers in many instances that we have come across. The role of women in disaster management and recovery, and Bangladesh being a disaster-prone zone, both in terms of humanitarian as well as natural disasters. The women's experiences needed the issues that came about on women's experiences and needs were equal participation in formal and informal governance structures. That's usual because we have a Ministry of Women and Child Affairs, Children Affairs, so which already takes that as its premise. So it's nothing new in Bangladesh, it's already there. But women's resilience to be strengthened in coping with violence and disasters is also forms a part of that regime, although it is exploring newer horizons as time goes by. Women's perception as in terms of justice and peace building is there in the national context in a very weak, it's still weak, but it is there. And women as important stakeholders in war against terrorism, I've already mentioned that. Another very important thing in terms of women being looked in an interstitial way, that is within the concepts of diversity and inclusiveness, which includes minority women. But minority, whether in terms of language, minority in terms of cultural, minority in terms of religion, and these forms the basic, the fundamentals of looking at women and peace and security affairs. So the Bangladesh played a part in 2000 in 1325 in the security as a non-permanent member of the Security Council at that time. And it's also a global leader in responding to emergencies in one of the most advanced disaster prepared plan, and of course the NAPSWIFT and the Women, Peace, Security and National Action Plan enhances and builds on Bangladesh's experience over the past decades. Very interestingly, one of the foremost features of this National Action Plan is it has an interministerial coordination group, which is non-existent in other national action plans. So we already have a national action plan on women and child affairs. We already have our women NAP on disaster reduction, and many others. So here, but each of them are led by a single ministry, perhaps supported by other ministry, like MOCA, which is short form Ministry of Women and Child Affairs. It has perhaps in its violence against women, the NAP on violence against women, the Home Ministry as its partner. But here we have 12 ministries, and this is the challenge. Will it work or will it not work? It had its hiccups in being formulated as a coordination group, and I'll tell you some of the challenges later. So another interesting thing is that here, for the first time, security forces or security actors are invited in the plan. Our Armed Forces Division had never had anything to do with development before. They take part in relief and relief recovery work and humanitarian as well as natural disasters. But so this armed forces and the other challenge was, of course, we brought in Ministry of Religious Affairs, Ministry of Chittagong Hill Tracts Affairs, meaning addressing diversity as another horizon that comes in this National Action Plan. Diana. So I'm going to skip the next few slides, which is outcomes and outputs. So I'm not going to go into the document. So let me talk more interestingly about the debates and discussions that went into the plan. So one of the debates, of course, was the Chittagong Hill Tracts. The Chittagong Hill Tracts, is a region which houses about 14 different ethnic groups, variously perceived, and has had a history of what you say insurgency, what the security forces term insurgency, but the people in the movement termed as a movement for autonomy. And so what is obviously was a militarized zone and is still a militarized zone. It has a lot of presence of the army there still. And so one of the things that, of course, the security actors being prominent and having a voice there did not, and also the minister. By the way, I forgot to mention that this NAP is being led by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. That itself was an issue at first, why it should be done so. But the Ministry of Foreign Affairs said that because we have to report to the Security Council, therefore it has to go through us, which was good because that's how the security actors came in. So they tried to influence, as well as the fact that CHT should not be part of the coordination group. This was a fight that had taken even me into sort of activist planes, because when I thought that they were going to go out altogether, then I wrote an article in our Daily Star that's saying that our Prime Minister got a award, a UNESCO award for peace on the basis of its treaty with the rebels in 1997. And so if the Ministry of CHT Affairs goes away from the coordination meeting, it will be denying her that prize. So the UN, the supporting organization was UN Women. So the UN Women were very, quite taken by this argument, and they said, well, we'll argue in favor of it as far as we can with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. So they did put up an argument, and I think basically they had to agree, because or else why have the ministry at all if you deny a peace treaty that went on. So that was brought in. The conflict of interest between ministries were also interesting. So MOFA in short, of Ministry of Foreign Affairs, why did MOFA have to, it treaded the tail of MOCA, which is the women's ministry, and so there was a dispute in MOCA, parts of MOCA Ministry of Women and Children's Affairs wanting to take the lead, but then it was quite calmed down because there was also this element of security actors vis-a-vis civil society. So all national action plans, especially when we looked at the region, the only other national action plan we had was Nepal, and in the Nepalese, they had a very good, it was basically a national action plan from post-conflict situation. So the Nepalese also brought in a lot of civil society consultations, which this plan also did. But then there was this, how far will they let the civil society in, was a big question. And the security actors said in monitoring and implementation, MOFA will take the lead. We had, of course, thought that civil society should take the lead as independent, monitors of the progress of this plan, but of course then it was taken by, I think it's a fight that still goes on. So civil society is there, but it is still not in the it's still not the lead, it's not taking the lead in monitoring. So frontline activism and institutions. So in civil society there are frontline activists, especially if you look at conflict areas, you have many frontline activists, but you also have institutionalized civil society who are treated as sort of intermediaries between the people down there and the government up here. So it's more that institutionalized civil society that was mediating rather than, and little of frontline activism. Although it was there, but it has, I think it will depend on the implementation of the plan and how far it comes in. So diversity and inclusivity was an important element to be brought in a country which had for long thought very nicely of themselves as Muslim moderate countries. And because it was an image that was being supported by the United States for a long time. But they found out with incidents of violent extremism that suddenly there is a precarity, in this concept. So diversity, we have been talking about diversity and inclusivity for a long time, but not being listened to. But now the situation has come when they have started to listening to us as that being one of the answers or one of the approaches through which you could contend with violent extremism. Interfaith, intrafaith was also a sub-dispute. Like, we almost always talk about interfaith dialogues, right? But one of our friends in a validation session brought up the fact, is it interfaith in Bangladesh or is it intrafaith? I mean, within the majority do you have more people with extreme views and with more liberal views. So protection, that was an interesting thing. Protection became an issue in current day Bangladesh because we had ordinarily what is a 4-pillar concept of the NEP. It was in the validation center turned into a 3-pillar with relief and disaster being incorporated as protection issues. And that was because of Rohingya issue. Because the Rohingyas have proved us to be donors as well, protectors, responsibility to protect as well as being receivers. So in the relief and disaster, Bangladesh was perceived eternally as a flood-prone zone, all disaster-prone country, but that was 5 years ago. But recently, Bangladesh is also, a place where it has to protect other people of other citizenships as well. And so relief and disaster became subsumed under protection. And another reason was that with the UN peacekeeping force, and that is why the security actors are in position now, and perhaps why the security actors,
3 minutes.
3?
minutes.
3 minutes, okay. Uh, because the security actors are now involved in the um, other countries, especially African countries, which is conflict-ridden and maintaining of peace. So they wanted to be on board. So they also like the idea of protection as an issue rather than the relief and disaster. And basically, the roots of patriarchal belief is embedded both in the both state as well as society. So state nowadays is kind of women-friendly, liberalized. It's giving off liberal statements, women and regarding gender equality. But in terms of societal beliefs, it is still very much embedded in this. And these are the concluding lessons that we have. That Bangladesh is placed, interestingly, between a post-conflict society and a stable democratic society. So we took lessons from, say, Nepal, in post-conflict Nepal, and we said, oh, we've done all this, you know. And then we look at UK and Belgium NAPs, and we said, oh, we have yet to achieve that, but then they are also looking at conflict other than their own country, so we also have to look. So it's a very transitional space that we are now occupying, and it has interesting things to look forward to as trends for future issues on gender equality and diversity. Gender discrimination ensues both from state as well as societal beliefs, and this is where I wanted to show you a film, just a 3 minutes clip maybe, of a theatre camp which we did in the Cox's Bazar, and which tried to bring in Cox's. You can see Cox's Bazar. You've heard a lot about it. See what it is right now.
শক্তিশালী করেছে মূলকরণে রাজনীতি, জন্ম দিয়েছে দুঃখ মানুষের।
These are Rohingyas, but self-settled Rohingyas.
দখল করেছে
The middle class has rituals they observe, like Shad. What is Shad in English?
আমার সমুদ্র আমার আমার সমুদ্র
It's a little girl from the Rakhine indigenous community who also live in that area.
আমরা যে নাটকটি মঞ্চস্থ করেছি তার কাহিনীটি এরকম। একজন চলচ্চিত্র নির্মাতা একটি চলচ্চিত্র নির্মাণ করছেন। যে চলচ্চিত্রে তিনি একটি অসহায় রোহিঙ্গা নারী নাট্যকর্মীর আত্মহত্যার করুণ কাহিনী তুলে ধরেছেন। তার প্রদর্শিত কাহিনীটি হচ্ছে একটি উন্নয়ন সংগঠন রোহিঙ্গাদের মনোদৈহিক স্বাস্থ্য সুরক্ষায় একটি নাট্য উপস্থাপনের সিদ্ধান্ত নেয়। নাটকটির বিষয় হচ্ছে প্রকৃতির প্রতি প্রেম।